There exists a quality that separates those who command respect from those who merely seek it, a distinction so profound that entire kingdoms have risen or fallen upon its presence or absence. You have felt it in rooms where certain men speak and others instinctively listen, in moments where decisions must be made and some step forward while others retreat into comfortable hesitation. This is not about physical strength, nor wealth, nor even intelligence alone, but something far more fundamental, a force that Niccolo Machiavelli understood better than perhaps any thinker who ever committed pen to parchment. The Florentine master observed that fortune favors the bold, not because the universe possesses benevolence, but because boldness itself creates the conditions through which a man shapes his destiny, rather than being shaped by circumstance. What you are about to discover in the next 22 minutes will either confirm what you have secretly suspected about your own potential or shatter the comfortable illusions you have constructed to explain why others succeed where you have stalled. Consider for a moment the men throughout history who transformed themselves from unremarkable beginnings into forces that altered the course of nations, not through supernatural gifts bestowed at birth, but through the deliberate cultivation of specific qualities that anyone with sufficient will can develop. Machiavelli did not write for princes who were born into power, but for those who would seize it, understanding that true masculine strength emerges not from bloodlines, but from the forge of intentional transformation. The question that haunts every man at some point in his existence is whether he possesses the capacity to become who he knows he should be, or whether he will remain forever in the shadow of his potential, watching other men claim the victories that could have been his. This video exists because that question deserves an honest answer, one stripped of comfortable platitudes and modern delusions about effortless success. The uncomfortable truth that Machiavelli grasped with crystalline clarity is that most men live their entire lives never truly becoming men at all, remaining instead perpetual adolescents wrapped in adult bodies, reacting to life rather than commanding it, seeking approval rather than earning respect, confusing the appearance of strength with its substance. Walk through any city and you will see them everywhere, speaking when they should be silent, silent when they should speak, mistaking kindness for weakness and aggression for power, never understanding that true masculine authority flows from an entirely different source. The prince who rules effectively, according to the great Florentine, must first learn to rule himself with an iron discipline that would break lesser spirits, must understand human nature at its most raw and unvarnished, must possess the courage to act when action is required, regardless of whether such action brings immediate comfort or distant glory. What transforms a boy into a man is not the passage of time, but the acceptance of certain fundamental realities that modern culture desperately tries to obscure beneath layers of self-deception and false comfort. Machiavelli observed that fortune is a woman who favors young men because they are less cautious, more fierce, and command her with greater audacity, a metaphor that reveals profound truths about the relationship between decisive action and opportunity. The man who waits for perfect conditions will wait forever, because perfect conditions are the fantasy of those who lack the courage to act amid uncertainty. The man who requires constant encouragement and validation before moving forward has already surrendered the very quality that would make such movement meaningful. What you will learn in this video is not a collection of motivational slogans designed to make you feel temporarily inspired, but a systematic understanding of how masculine power actually operates in the real world. Knowledge that will either compel you to transform or force you to confront why you choose to remain as you are. By the time these 22 minutes conclude, you will possess a framework that has guided conquerors, statesmen, and visionaries across 5 centuries. Principles that remain as relevant in modern boardrooms and relationships as they were in Renaissance courts and battlefields. The choice of what to do with this knowledge belongs entirely to you, but understand that ignorance will no longer serve as a shield against responsibility for your own development. Machiavelli wrote that men rise from low to high station more often through fraud than through force, but also that both fraud and force require a kind of strength that the common man deliberately avoids cultivating, because such cultivation demands confronting uncomfortable truths about human nature and one's own character. The question is not whether you have the capacity to develop these qualities, because the capacity exists within every man who draws breath, but whether you possess the will to endure what such development requires. Everything that follows assumes you have made that choice, that you are willing to see yourself and the world clearly, regardless of how such clarity might disrupt the comfortable narratives you have constructed, and that you understand transformation is never comfortable, but always worth the price it demands. The first principle that Machiavelli understood with perfect clarity is that no man can command others who has not first learned to command himself, a truth so fundamental that all subsequent power flows from this singular source. Consider the prince who cannot control his own appetites, yet expects his subjects to follow his decrees, the general who panics under pressure, yet demands courage from his soldiers, the father who lacks discipline, yet wonders why his children respect no boundaries. The world respects only that which demonstrates internal coherence, where stated values align with demonstrated behavior, where words find their echo in actions taken when no one watches. This is why the development of masculine power begins not with external strategies, but with the ruthless governance of one's own nature. The ability to override immediate impulses in service of longer-term objectives, to endure discomfort without complaint, to maintain composure when chaos surrounds. Modern culture has deliberately confused self-command with self-denial, creating the false impression that discipline represents some form of psychological imprisonment rather than the key to authentic freedom. Nothing could be further from the truth that Machiavelli revealed through his careful study of successful leaders across generations. The man who cannot delay gratification remains forever enslaved to his appetites, dancing like a puppet to every fleeting desire, never accumulating the power that comes from sustained effort over time. The man who requires external validation before acting has surrendered his agency to the opinions of others, becoming a reed that bends with every passing wind rather than an oak that stands firm regardless of storm. True self-command means making decisions based on calculated assessment of likely outcomes rather than emotional reactions, means following through on commitments even when enthusiasm wanes, means maintaining standards even when relaxing those standards would bring temporary relief. The practical application of this principle requires creating systems that make disciplined behavior inevitable rather than optional. Understanding that willpower functions as a muscle that strengthens with use, but fatigues with overexertion. Machiavelli noted that the prince must be both lion and fox, possessing strength but also cunning, able to fight when necessary, but wise enough to avoid fights that serve no purpose. This duality applies equally to self-governance, where one must be fierce in maintaining personal standards, yet intelligent in designing those standards to align with human nature rather than contradicting it. Wake at the same hour, regardless of how you feel, exercise before excuses arise, complete difficult tasks when energy peaks rather than procrastinating until exhaustion sets in. Maintain boundaries in relationships even when pressure mounts to relax them. These are not arbitrary restrictions, but the architecture through which masculine power accumulates over time. What separates men who transform from those who merely discuss transformation is the willingness to endure extended periods where discipline yields no visible reward, where the gap between current reality and desired outcome seems impossibly wide, where every instinct screams to abandon the path and return to comfortable mediocrity. Machiavelli observed that fortune favors the bold, specifically because boldness requires continuing forward despite uncertainty, despite setbacks, despite the jeers of those who lack the courage to attempt anything significant themselves. The cultivation of self-command means developing the capacity to act from principle rather than feeling, to maintain course when storms rage, to treat discomfort as information rather than emergency. This is not about becoming some kind of stoic automaton, but about recognizing that emotions make terrible masters yet excellent servants, providing valuable data but requiring conscious direction rather than blind obedience. The enemy of self-command is not pleasure itself, but the inability to choose the timing and context of pleasure, the surrender to impulse over intention. A man who drinks because he decided to drink exercises choice. A man who drinks because he cannot tolerate sobriety demonstrates slavery. A man who rests after completing important work earns recuperation. A man who rests to avoid important work merely postpones inevitable consequences. Machiavelli understood that effective rulers must sometimes appear merciful and sometimes cruel, not from sadism, but from clear assessment of which quality serves the situation at hand. Applied to self-governance, this means treating yourself with compassion when circumstances genuinely warrant it, but with uncompromising firmness when you detect the slippery whispers of rationalization attempting to justify abandoned standards. The ability to distinguish between these scenarios separates those who progress from those who stagnate while convincing themselves they are being kind to themselves. Consider how the great strategists throughout history achieved seemingly impossible victories, not through superior numbers or resources, but through superior discipline that allowed coordinated action when opponents descended into chaos. Napoleon Bonaparte, whom Machiavelli would have recognized as a true prince in spirit if not title, conquered much of Europe through armies that could execute complex maneuvers, because each soldier had mastered basic disciplines so thoroughly that proper action became automatic. Your life represents a campaign with yourself as general, your habits as soldiers, your goals as territory to conquer. The general who cannot maintain discipline in camp will lose every battle in field, not because enemies prove stronger, but because internal chaos prevents effective response to external challenges. Begin therefore with small victories that establish credibility with yourself, promises made and kept, discomforts endured, temptations resisted, until the pattern of self-command becomes so deeply embedded that wavering feels more uncomfortable than continuing. The transformation from chaos to command typically requires somewhere between 60 and 90 days of consistent practice before new patterns solidify into genuine changes in identity rather than temporary modifications in behavior. Machiavelli would recognize this period as the dangerous time when the new prince must consolidate power, when old habits mount their fiercest resistance, when the gap between who you were and who you are becoming creates maximum psychological tension. Most men fail during this window, not because the practices themselves prove too difficult, but because they lack the philosophical foundation to sustain effort when results remain invisible. Understanding that self-command represents the irreducible prerequisite for every form of external power transforms discipline from burden into investment, from sacrifice into strategy. The question is not whether you can master yourself, but whether you believe mastery matters enough to endure what the process requires. And that question will be answered not by your intentions, but by your actions over the coming months. Machiavelli observed that the prince must learn to see the world as it actually operates, rather than as he wishes it would operate, a distinction that separates effective leaders from idealistic failures who wonder why reality refuses to conform to their preferences. The second pillar of masculine transformation involves developing the capacity to perceive situations, people and dynamics with ruthless accuracy, stripped of comforting illusions and self-serving distortions. This does not mean becoming cynical or paranoid, but rather cultivating the discernment to recognize patterns, motivations, and likely outcomes based on demonstrated behavior rather than stated intentions. Most men stumble through life responding to the surface layer of reality while remaining blind to the deeper currents that actually determine outcomes, wondering why they keep encountering the same problems in different costumes, never understanding that unexamined perception creates repetitive experience. The first step toward strategic perception requires accepting that people reveal who they are through actions over time rather than through words spoken in moments of convenience. Machiavelli famously noted that men are so simple and so ready to obey present necessities that he who deceives will always find those who allow themselves to be deceived. This insight cuts both ways, warning against being the deceiver who mistakes temporary success for sustainable strategy, while also cautioning against being among those deceived by failing to verify claims through observation. Watch how people behave when they believe no one important is watching. Notice the gap between professed values and actual choices. Track patterns across multiple situations rather than forming conclusions from isolated incidents. The woman who speaks constantly of loyalty yet gossips about absent friends will eventually gossip about you. The business partner who cuts corners with suppliers will eventually cut corners with you. The friend who abandons others during difficulty will abandon you when maintaining the friendship becomes inconvenient. Strategic perception extends beyond assessing other people to include accurate evaluation of your own strengths, weaknesses, resources, and limitations. Machiavelli counseled that the prince should never attempt to defend positions he cannot hold, advice that applies equally to personal development, where overextending resources guarantees failure. The man who simultaneously tries to transform his body, career, relationships, and finances while maintaining elaborate social obligations and entertainment habits sets himself up for collapse through diffusion of effort. Better to identify the single highest leverage point in your current situation. Concentrate overwhelming force on that position until breakthrough occurs. Then systematically expand to adjacent territories once the first victory consolidates. This requires honest assessment of where you actually stand rather than where you wish you stood, acknowledging gaps in knowledge or capability without shame, but also without using such acknowledgement as excuse for inaction. The development of strategic perception involves deliberately seeking information that contradicts your existing beliefs, specifically hunting for evidence that you might be wrong about important assumptions that guide your decisions. Machiavelli understood that the prince who surrounds himself only with flatterers soon loses touch with reality, making decisions based on distorted information until disaster arrives unexpected. Create mechanisms that force confrontation with uncomfortable truths, whether through trusted advisors who possess permission to speak candidly, through regular review of objective metrics that reveal actual progress rather than imagined advancement, or through strategic exposure to perspectives that challenge your worldview. The goal is not to become paralyzed by doubt, but to ensure that confidence rests on accurate foundation rather than on wishful thinking decorated with selective evidence. One of the most valuable skills within strategic perception involves learning to distinguish between problems that require your intervention and situations that will resolve themselves if left alone, between genuine threats that demand immediate response and phantom fears that evaporate with patient observation. Machiavelli noted that the prince should never waste his forces on battles that do not advance his strategic position, understanding that energy represents the most precious and limited resource available. Many men exhaust themselves fighting every minor slight, responding to every provocation, involving themselves in dramas that have nothing to do with their actual objectives. The ability to ignore what does not matter, to let insults pass without response when response serves no purpose, to remain unmoved by attempts to manipulate through emotional triggers, conserves power for deployment when stakes actually matter. This is not weakness but supreme strategic intelligence, the difference between the general who wins wars and the soldier who wins arguments. Strategic perception also requires understanding the broader context within which your individual actions take place, recognizing that the same behavior produces different results depending on timing, setting, and surrounding circumstances. Machiavelli famously argued that what works in one era might fail in another, not because the principle changed, but because conditions shifted in ways that rewarded different approaches. The networking strategies that built careers 20 years ago may prove less effective in an age of digital connection. Just as the relationship dynamics that sustained marriages in traditional societies require modification in cultures emphasizing individual fulfillment. This does not mean abandoning timeless principles, but rather understanding how to apply those principles within whatever context you inhabit. The man who rigidly applies strategies from a different era without adaptation becomes like the general still preparing for the previous war, technically correct in his understanding of past battles, but strategically obsolete in present circumstances. Perhaps the deepest level of strategic perception involves recognizing your own psychological patterns, the recurring scripts that play out in your relationships and decisions, the ways you systematically sabotage yourself without conscious awareness. Machiavelli would have appreciated modern psychology's recognition that we often become our own greatest obstacles, that the enemy within proves more dangerous than external adversaries because internal enemies operate with perfect knowledge of our vulnerabilities. Notice the situations where you consistently react in ways you later regret, the relationship dynamics you keep recreating despite promising yourself this time will be different. The self-destructive choices that seem to arise from nowhere yet follow predictable patterns once you learn to recognize them. Developing awareness of these patterns represents the first step toward changing them, creating that crucial gap between stimulus and response where conscious choice becomes possible. The unexamined life, as the ancient Greeks understood, remains forever at the mercy of forces the person never learns to see, making genuine transformation impossible regardless of how fervently change is desired. Machiavelli understood that fortune favors those who act decisively in moments of uncertainty, yet he also recognized the distinction between true courage and reckless bravado that mistakes foolishness for bravery. The third essential element in masculine transformation involves cultivating the capacity to move forward despite fear, doubt, and incomplete information, but to do so based on strategic calculation rather than blind impulse. This represents perhaps the most misunderstood quality in modern discussions of masculinity, where courage gets confused with either thoughtless aggression or with toxic positivity that denies legitimate concerns. Authentic courage means acknowledging risks accurately while refusing to let those risks paralyze action when action serves your strategic interest, means feeling fear fully while not allowing fear to dictate your choices. Means accepting that significant achievement requires venturing beyond zones of comfort into territories where failure remains possible. The development of calculated courage begins with understanding that fear serves as information rather than command. a signal alerting you to potential danger that requires assessment rather than an order demanding retreat. Machiavelli observed that the prince must learn when to be cautious and when to be bold, developing the judgment to distinguish between situations where patience serves better than action and moments where delay guarantees defeat. This discernment emerges not from abstract theorizing, but from accumulated experience, making decisions under uncertainty, observing outcomes, adjusting future calculations based on lessons learned. Start small, with low-stakes decisions that push slightly beyond your comfort zone, whether approaching strangers to practice social courage, taking cold showers to build tolerance for discomfort, or speaking unpopular truths when remaining silent would prove easier. Each small victory over hesitation strengthens the capacity for larger acts of courage when circumstances demand them. One of the great secrets about courage that most men never discover is that it does not eliminate fear, but rather develops the ability to function effectively while fear remains present. The soldier who claims to feel no fear in battle either lies or suffers from dangerous psychological deficiency. The effective soldier feels fear, but executes his training anyway, because survival depends on action rather than freezing. Machiavelli would have recognized this immediately, understanding that the prince who never feels fear likely lacks the intelligence to recognize genuine danger, while the prince paralyzed by fear lacks the will necessary to seize opportunities when they arise. Your goal is not to become fearless, but to become functional despite fear. To train your body and mind so thoroughly in proper responses that correct action flows even when emotions scream for flight. This is why preparation matters so intensely, why rehearsing difficult conversations before having them, why practicing skills before high-pressure situations, why establishing routines that operate automatically when conscious thought becomes unreliable. The relationship between courage and reputation deserves special attention, as Machiavelli understood that a reputation for courage can itself become a weapon that makes courage less necessary in practice. When others know you will respond decisively to challenges, many challenges never arise because potential adversaries seek easier targets. When you have demonstrated willingness to accept conflict rather than surrendering under pressure, most people unconsciously adjust their behavior to avoid triggering that response. This is not about cultivating artificial toughness or looking for fights, but rather about establishing through consistent action that you possess boundaries that will not move regardless of how much pressure gets applied. The man who draws clear lines and enforces them without excessive emotion gradually discovers that others respect those boundaries, while the man who constantly renegotiates his standards in response to pressure trains everyone around him to apply pressure whenever they want something. Calculated courage also involves the willingness to fail publicly, to attempt things at which you might not succeed, to risk looking foolish in service of goals that matter more than your immediate comfort. Machiavelli observed that it is better to be impetuous than cautious, because fortune is a woman and must be beaten and struck down, a metaphor that speaks to the necessity of bold action in moments of opportunity, regardless of whether success is guaranteed. Most men remain trapped in mediocrity, not because they lack ability, but because they lack the courage to risk failure, to attempt things where the outcome remains uncertain, to expose themselves to possible criticism or rejection. Yet every significant achievement in human history emerged from someone willing to venture beyond the known into the uncertain, to stake their reputation on an outcome they could not control, to endure the discomfort of not knowing whether their effort would ultimately succeed. The price of such courage is occasional failure, but the price of avoiding such courage is certain stagnation. There exists a particular kind of courage that proves especially difficult for modern men to develop. The courage to stand alone when necessary, to maintain unpopular positions when you believe those positions correct, to resist social pressure that demands conformity to standards you reject. Machiavelli understood that the effective prince must sometimes act in ways that others condemn, must make decisions that bring criticism, must prioritize strategic necessity over immediate popularity. This does not mean being contrarian for its own sake or deliberately antagonizing others without purpose, but rather developing the internal fortitude to withstand disapproval when your judgment contradicts consensus. The man who requires constant approval remains forever at the mercy of those whose approval he seeks, adjusting his positions and behaviors to maintain acceptance, never able to pursue objectives that might temporarily distance him from the crowd. Building this particular form of courage requires first establishing a strong internal compass calibrated to your own values and long-term objectives, then gradually increasing your tolerance for social discomfort by taking small stands on minor issues before attempting larger acts of independence. The ultimate expression of calculated courage involves the willingness to transform yourself despite not knowing exactly who you will become through that transformation, to commit to a process whose destination remains somewhat uncertain, to trust that movement toward growth serves you better than stagnation in familiar discomfort. Machiavelli might have framed this as the courage to seize fortune when she presents opportunity, even though the final outcome cannot be guaranteed. Every man who undertakes serious transformation faces moments of profound uncertainty, where the old self has died, but the new self has not yet fully emerged, where familiar patterns no longer fit, but new patterns feel strange and uncomfortable. Most men retreat during these liminal periods, returning to known territory because the uncertainty proves too unsettling. Those who push through discover that the discomfort passes, that new patterns gradually become as natural as old ones once were, that the person on the other side of transformation often exceeds what was initially imagined possible. This courage to become, rather than merely to do, represents perhaps the highest form of bravery, available only to those willing to surrender the false security of unchanging identity in favor of deliberate evolution toward a better version of themselves. Machiavelli shocked his contemporaries by suggesting that the prince should prioritize what actually preserves his power over what others believe he should do, recognizing that moral posturing without strategic effectiveness ultimately serves no one, including those the prince might wish to help. The fourth pillar of masculine transformation involves developing sophisticated understanding of self-interest. Neither the crude selfishness that modern culture rightly condemns, nor the self-abnegating martyrdom that secretly harbors resentment. True mastery of rational self-interest means recognizing that you cannot pour from an empty cup, that sustainable contribution to others requires first ensuring your own foundation remains solid, that helping others from position of strength differs fundamentally from helping others while drowning yourself. This proves difficult for many men who absorb messages suggesting that attending to their own needs represents moral failure. Yet such men inevitably become burdens rather than assets as their resources deplete. The starting point for rational self-interest involves conducting honest inventory of your actual needs versus conditioned wants, distinguishing between investments that genuinely build capacity and expenditures that merely provide temporary comfort. Machiavelli understood that the prince must husband his resources carefully because wasteful spending today creates vulnerability tomorrow. Advice equally applicable to personal development, where time, energy, attention, and money all represent finite resources requiring strategic allocation. Ask yourself whether each commitment you maintain, each relationship you preserve, each activity you engage in genuinely serves your core objectives or merely continues from habit or social obligation. The man who fills his life with activities that do not align with his actual priorities effectively guarantees mediocrity regardless of how busy or important those activities make him feel. Better to have 3 genuine priorities receiving focused attention than 10 scattered commitments receiving fragmented effort. Understanding rational self-interest requires recognizing that not all relationships serve mutual benefit, that some connections drain more than they provide, that loyalty without reciprocity becomes exploitation, no matter how much the exploited party rationalizes the imbalance. Machiavelli noted that one should never fall so far in favor that one cannot rise again, warning against investing so heavily in relationships that your well-being becomes hostage to another person's whims. This does not mean treating relationships as purely transactional or abandoning people during temporary difficulties, but rather maintaining clear awareness of patterns where certain individuals consistently take while rarely giving, where your needs remain perpetually subordinate to theirs, where the relationship survives only through your continual sacrifice of time, energy, or resources. The man who cannot set boundaries in relationships will find his most valuable resources consumed by those least deserving of them, leaving nothing for pursuits that actually advance his development. Strategic self-interest also involves investing heavily in your own capabilities, skills, knowledge, and networks. Recognizing that these appreciating assets provide returns across decades while consumption expenditures vanish immediately. Machiavelli would have appreciated the modern concept of human capital, understanding that the prince who develops his own capacities becomes increasingly valuable, while the prince who merely consumes his inheritance gradually loses relevance. Dedicate significant portions of time and money to education that increases your earning capacity, to training that develops valuable skills, to experiences that expand your perspective and network, to health practices that preserve your physical and mental functioning. These investments feel expensive in the moment, but prove remarkably inexpensive compared to the opportunity costs of remaining stagnant, of watching younger competitors surpass you because they invested in growth while you invested in comfort. The tension between short-term pleasure and long-term benefit represents perhaps the central challenge in mastering rational self-interest, as immediate gratification perpetually tempts defection from strategies that would serve better over extended time frames. Machiavelli observed that the prince must be willing to endure temporary unpopularity to implement policies that ultimately benefit his people, accepting short-term costs for long-term gains. Applied personally, this means developing the capacity to choose the difficult path today that leads somewhere worth going over the easy path that merely avoids immediate discomfort. The man who always selects the comfortable option in each individual moment discovers that the accumulation of such choices creates a deeply uncomfortable life, while the man who regularly chooses strategic discomfort finds that life becomes progressively easier as capabilities compound and obstacles diminish. This is not about mindless self-deprivation, but about calibrating your decisions to optimize for where you want to be in 5 years, rather than where you want to be in 5 minutes. Rational self-interest extends to how you allocate your most precious and irreplaceable resource, your attention, recognizing that modern existence bombards you with thousands of attempts to capture and redirect your focus toward concerns that do not serve you. Machiavelli would have immediately grasped how social media, news cycles, and entertainment industries function as mechanisms to extract attention from productive endeavors and redirect it toward consumption that benefits providers rather than consumers. The man who allows his attention to be captured by whatever stimulus presents itself most loudly effectively surrenders agency over his own life, responding to others' priorities rather than pursuing his own. Develop ruthless filters that protect your attention from exploitation, whether through limiting exposure to media that generates outrage without enabling action, through establishing boundaries around deep work periods when interruptions are not permitted, or through regularly auditing how your time actually gets spent versus how you imagine it gets spent. Most men drastically underestimate how much of their attention leaks away to activities that serve neither pleasure nor purpose. The sophisticated understanding of self-interest recognizes that humans are fundamentally social creatures whose individual flourishing connects intimately to the quality of their relationships and communities, making certain forms of contribution to others actually serve enlightened self-interest rather than contradicting it. Machiavelli understood that the prince who cultivates genuine loyalty among key supporters builds more sustainable power than the prince who rules through fear alone. Similarly, the man who develops reputation for reliability, who helps others strategically, who contributes to communities that matter to him, invests in social capital that returns dividends across decades. The key distinction is between contribution that flows from abundance and serves strategic purpose versus sacrifice that flows from depletion and serves primarily to avoid guilt. Build yourself strong enough that helping others becomes expression of strength rather than source of weakness. Then help strategically rather than indiscriminately, focusing on those who will remember and reciprocate rather than dispersing resources among those who take assistance for granted. Machiavelli recognized that power exists as much in perception as in material resources, that the prince who appears strong often faces fewer challenges than the prince who is strong but appears weak. The fifth essential dimension of masculine transformation involves mastering the subtle arts of presence and frame control, becoming the kind of man whose energy commands attention when he enters a room, whose reality becomes the default reality others adjust to, rather than the reverse. This is not about manipulation or artificial persona, but rather about developing such internal coherence and purposeful direction that your authentic self naturally draws respect and influences situations. Most men stumble through social interactions, reacting to others' frames, unconsciously adjusting their behavior to match surrounding energy rather than establishing their own gravitational center that others orbit. The foundation of powerful presence begins with complete acceptance of yourself as you currently exist, neither inflating accomplishments to impress others nor deflating them to avoid triggering insecurity, simply owning your reality without apology or justification. Machiavelli understood that those who appear confident in their position attract support, while those who seem uncertain about their standing invite challenges. This does not mean pretending to be something you are not, but rather fully inhabiting whatever you actually are at this moment, presenting yourself without the self-consciousness that signals internal conflict, the man who apologizes for taking up space, who minimizes his own needs to accommodate others before being asked, who constantly seeks permission through verbal or non-verbal checking, communicates low status regardless of his actual accomplishments. Practice occupying space deliberately, speaking at comfortable volume without rushing, maintaining eye contact without darting away, moving through the world as if you have every right to be exactly where you are, doing exactly what you are doing. Frame control operates through subtle mechanisms where the person with strongest reality determines how situations get interpreted, what topics receive attention, what behaviors count as acceptable, all without explicit negotiation. Machiavelli would recognize this as the art of defining terrain before battle begins, ensuring that conflict, if it occurs, happens on ground favorable to your interests. When someone attempts to make you defensive, responding defensively accepts their frame that you have something to defend. Remaining unruffled and redirecting toward topics that interest you maintains your frame. When someone tries to rush your decision through artificial urgency, slowing down deliberately reasserts your control over your own timeline. When someone attempts to trigger guilt or obligation, calmly acknowledging their desire while maintaining your own course prevents manipulation. These micro-adjustments compound over time into patterns where others unconsciously recognize you as someone who operates from internal authority rather than external permission. The quality of your presence depends heavily on your energetic state, which in turn depends on physical factors like sleep, nutrition, exercise, and stress management that many men neglect while wondering why they feel perpetually off balance. Machiavelli counseled that the prince should never neglect military training even in times of peace, understanding that maintaining readiness requires consistent effort rather than last-minute cramming. Your body represents your primary instrument in the world, and allowing it to deteriorate through neglect guarantees diminished capacity, regardless of how brilliant your strategies might be. Prioritize sleep as non-negotiable foundation for cognitive function, emotional regulation, and physical recovery. Fuel your body with nutrition that sustains energy rather than merely satisfying cravings. Move vigorously enough to maintain strength and cardiovascular capacity. Develop practices that discharge stress rather than accumulating it. The man who feels physically vital naturally projects different energy than the man who feels perpetually exhausted, and others respond to this difference unconsciously even when they cannot articulate what they perceive. Presence and frame also manifest through how you handle conflict and disagreement, whether you remain centered and purposeful when others become emotional and chaotic, or whether their emotional states infect your own and pull you off course. Machiavelli observed that the prince must learn to remain steady amid the storms that inevitably arise in governance, making clear decisions when others panic. Practice maintaining your emotional equilibrium when others around you lose theirs, not through cold detachment, but through centered awareness that allows you to feel emotions without being controlled by them. When someone raises their voice, lowering yours creates a symmetry that often de-escalates situations. When someone accelerates toward decision, deliberately slowing your own pace prevents being rushed into poor choices. When someone attempts to make their emergency your emergency, calmly assessing whether genuine urgency exists rather than automatically matching their frenetic energy. These responses emerge naturally when you have done the internal work of self-command discussed earlier, as external steadiness reflects internal stability. The social dimension of presence involves understanding group dynamics and how to navigate them effectively, recognizing that every group contains implicit hierarchies and status negotiations, regardless of whether participants consciously acknowledge these realities. Machiavelli was a keen observer of court dynamics, understanding that power flows through informal networks of alliance and rivalry, at least as much as through formal chains of command. Pay attention to who others seek approval from, who speaks and gets heard versus who speaks and gets ignored, where alliances exist and where fault lines run through apparently unified groups. Position yourself strategically within social networks, cultivating relationships with those who possess influence, while avoiding entanglement in petty rivalries that serve no purpose. The goal is not to become some kind of Machiavellian schemer, but rather to operate with clear awareness of how power actually functions in human groups, so you can navigate these realities effectively rather than naively. Perhaps the most powerful element of presence involves developing capacity to make others feel significant in your presence without diminishing yourself, creating interactions where people leave feeling elevated by having encountered you. Machiavelli understood that the prince who inspires genuine loyalty rather than mere fear creates more sustainable power. And such loyalty emerges partly from making followers feel valued and important. This is not about flattery or manipulation, but about giving people your full attention when you interact with them, remembering details about their lives and referencing those details in future interactions, asking thoughtful questions that demonstrate genuine interest, acknowledging their contributions explicitly when they help or support you. The man who makes others feel invisible while demanding attention for himself becomes isolated regardless of his accomplishments, while the man who elevates others while maintaining his own center becomes a hub that attracts valuable relationships naturally. Practice this generosity of attention selectively with those who deserve it, not as performance, but as recognition that power increases when shared strategically rather than hoarded fearfully. Machiavelli distinguished between those who merely react to circumstances and those who shape circumstances toward desired ends, recognizing that the latter category contains the true princes, regardless of their formal titles. The sixth pillar of masculine transformation involves developing systematic approach to achievement that transforms vague aspirations into concrete realities through consistent application of purposeful action. This is not about motivational platitudes or vision boards, but about the unglamorous work of breaking large objectives into manageable components, executing those components despite resistance, adjusting strategy based on feedback, persisting until breakthrough occurs. Most men fail not because their goals are impossible, but because they never develop the structural discipline to translate intention into sustained action over the months and years that significant achievement requires. The starting point for purposeful action involves clarifying with precision what you actually want to accomplish and why those accomplishments matter to you specifically, rather than to some external audience whose approval you seek. Machiavelli would have immediately recognized how many princes pursue objectives because they believe they should want them, rather than because those objectives align with their genuine nature and values. Spend substantial time examining whether your goals emerge from authentic desire or from internalized expectations planted by family, culture, or social pressure. The man pursuing someone else's vision of success discovers that achievement brings hollow satisfaction because the victory never belonged to him in the first place. Once you have identified objectives that genuinely matter to you, articulate them with enough specificity that you can recognize achievement when it occurs, rather than moving goalposts perpetually forward to avoid acknowledging success. Strategic action requires understanding that different objectives demand different timeframes and approaches, that the methods for achieving something within weeks differ fundamentally from methods for achieving something across decades. Machiavelli counseled that the prince should match his strategy to his circumstances, rather than rigidly applying the same approach regardless of context. For immediate objectives measured in days or weeks, intensive focused effort often proves most effective, temporarily sacrificing balance to achieve breakthrough that resets your baseline. For medium-term, objectives spanning months to a year, sustainable routines that advance the goal incrementally without burning out become essential. For long-term objectives across multiple years, the key is maintaining consistency through the inevitable periods of stagnation and apparent regression that characterize any extended development process. Most men fail at long-term objectives not because they lack intensity, but because they lack the patience and persistence to continue when progress becomes invisible. The execution of purposeful action demands developing systems that make desired behaviors automatic rather than requiring constant willpower expenditure. Machiavelli understood that the prince who depends on extraordinary effort cannot sustain effective governance because extraordinary effort cannot be maintained indefinitely. Build your life architecture so that important actions happen by default rather than requiring special motivation. whether through environmental design that removes obstacles to desired behaviors, through scheduling that protects time for priorities before less important activities consume available hours, or through accountability mechanisms that create external pressure when internal motivation wanes. The goal is to make doing the right thing easier than not doing it, or at minimum to ensure that not doing it creates sufficient friction that you must consciously choose to defect from your system rather than drifting into non-action. Purposeful action also requires developing tolerance for imperfect action and incomplete information, recognizing that waiting for perfect clarity or ideal conditions effectively guarantees inaction as circumstances never align perfectly. Machiavelli famously argued that it is better to act and be wrong than to fail to act and miss opportunity, understanding that mistakes made through action can be corrected, while mistakes of omission compound into permanent regret. Adopt a bias toward experimentation and iteration rather than extensive planning that never converts to execution. Launch the project before it feels completely ready. Have the difficult conversation before you have perfectly rehearsed every word. Make the investment before you have eliminated every doubt. The man who requires absolute certainty before moving forward remains perpetually frozen, while the man who accepts uncertainty as permanent condition develops capacity to navigate ambiguity effectively. One of the most valuable distinctions in purposeful action involves learning to separate effort from outcome, maintaining commitment to excellent process while releasing attachment to specific results. Machiavelli understood that fortune plays a role in human affairs regardless of how well the prince prepares, that sometimes circumstances beyond your control determine outcomes despite perfect execution. Control what you can control completely: your preparation, your effort, your attitude, your recovery from setbacks, while accepting that final outcomes emerge from the intersection of your actions with countless other variables you cannot influence. This is not fatalism, but strategic wisdom that preserves energy for what matters while preventing demoralization when external factors override your efforts. The man who blames himself for results outside his control wastes emotional energy better spent on next action, while the man who refuses to take responsibility for controllable factors never learns from failures. The architecture of purposeful action must also include regular review and recalibration, as strategies that worked yesterday may require modification today when circumstances shift. Machiavelli noted that successful princes adapt to changing conditions rather than rigidly maintaining the same approach regardless of context. Schedule periodic assessment of your progress toward objectives, examining not just what you accomplished, but also what you learned about yourself and your situation through the attempt. What assumed about your goals proved accurate and what proved mistaken? Which strategies yielded better results than expected and which consumed resources without commensurate return? What obstacles emerged that you failed to anticipate, and how might you address them more effectively going forward? This kind of systematic review converts experience into wisdom, ensuring that you actually learn from your efforts rather than merely accumulating random experiences that teach nothing because you never pause to extract their lessons. Finally, purposeful action requires building capacity to persist through the inevitable periods where progress stalls, where enthusiasm wanes, where obstacles seem insurmountable and the path forward disappears into fog. Machiavelli would recognize these as the moments that separate true princes from pretenders, where those with genuine commitment continue while those with mere interest abandon the field. Develop psychological strategies that allow you to continue when motivation vanishes, whether through connecting daily actions to deeper sense of identity and values, through breaking overwhelming objectives into such small steps that continuing seems possible even when finishing seems impossible, or through drawing on accumulated evidence of past perseverance to remind yourself that you have navigated similar difficulties before. The man who only acts when he feels motivated accomplishes little because motivation naturally fluctuates, while the man who acts from commitment rather than feeling gradually achieves what initially seemed impossible through the simple but profound power of continuing when others quit. Machiavelli understood that the effective prince represents more than the sum of individual capabilities, that true power emerges when various strengths integrate into coherent whole, greater than separate parts. The final and perhaps most challenging dimension of masculine transformation involves integrating everything discussed previously into a unified approach to life, where self-command, strategic perception, calculated courage, rational self-interest, powerful presence and purposeful action reinforce each other rather than operating as isolated skills. This integration transforms you from someone who occasionally demonstrates masculine qualities into someone who embodies masculine power as fundamental aspect of identity, where effective action flows naturally from who you are rather than requiring constant conscious effort to perform behaviors alien to your nature. The integration process begins with recognizing that these various dimensions of masculine power are not actually separate, but rather different facets of single underlying reality, different angles on the same essential quality of purposeful self-governance in service of meaningful objectives. Self-command provides the foundation that makes everything else possible, as without governance of your own nature, you cannot effectively perceive reality, cannot sustain courage under pressure, cannot pursue rational self-interest over immediate gratification, cannot maintain powerful presence when challenges arise, cannot execute purposeful action consistently. Strategic perception builds on self-command by extending accurate assessment from your internal states to external realities, developing the discernment to see situations clearly rather than through distorting lenses of wishful thinking or fear. Calculated courage then provides the capacity to act on what strategic perception reveals despite uncertainty and risk, moving from analysis into implementation despite discomfort. Rational self-interest shapes how you deploy courage and action, ensuring that your efforts serve objectives that genuinely advance your development rather than scattering energy across activities that merely feel busy or important without actually building capacity. Powerful presence emerges naturally when the previous elements align. As the man who commands himself sees clearly, acts courageously, and pursues rational objectives, naturally projects different energy than the man lacking these qualities. Purposeful action provides the mechanism through which all previous elements convert from internal qualities into external results, the architecture that transforms potential into actuality through sustained effort over time. None of these operates independently. Each strengthens and enables the others in continuous reinforcing cycle where development in any area facilitates development in all areas. The integrated man operates from center rather than circumference, responding to situations from stable core rather than being blown about by whatever wind currently blows strongest. Machiavelli would recognize this as the quality that allows the prince to maintain course, despite the chaos and complexity that inevitably surrounds power. The ability to remain himself regardless of external pressure. This centeredness does not mean rigidity or inability to adapt, but rather the opposite. The security to adjust strategies flexibly because adaptation flows from stable identity, rather than from desperate attempts to please others or avoid conflict. The tree with deep roots can bend in strong winds without breaking, while the shallow-rooted tree snaps under lesser pressure. Integration provides the deep roots that allow flexible adaptation without loss of fundamental identity. Integration also involves reconciling apparent contradictions in masculine power, developing capacity to be both fierce and gentle, both ambitious and content, both independent and connected, both rational and passionate. Machiavelli understood that effective princes must cultivate seemingly opposite qualities and deploy them appropriately to circumstances, rather than remaining locked in single mode, regardless of context. The man who can only be soft becomes a doormat, while the man who can only be hard becomes brittle. True power requires the flexibility to adjust your approach while maintaining consistency in core values and objectives. This is not about being inauthentic or manipulative, but about recognizing that different situations call for different qualities, and that masculine maturity includes developing full range of responses rather than limiting yourself to narrowband. The practical work of integration involves consistently returning to fundamental principles when you lose your way, which will happen repeatedly because transformation is not linear, but rather spiral process where you revisit similar challenges at increasing levels of sophistication. Machiavelli noted that the prince must sometimes appear to lose ground in order to ultimately advance his position, accepting temporary setbacks as part of larger strategic movement. When you notice yourself slipping back into old patterns of poor self-command, rather than interpreting this as failure, recognize it as opportunity to strengthen your foundation through renewed commitment. When strategic perception becomes clouded by emotion or wishful thinking, pause to recenter in clear observation of what actually is, rather than what you wish would be. When courage falters in face of significant risk, remember that courage is not absence of fear, but action despite fear, and take the next smallest step, even if you cannot yet take the leap. Integration ultimately produces what might be called natural authority, the quality possessed by men who others instinctively recognize as leaders, regardless of formal position or title. Machiavelli observed that certain princes commanded loyalty and respect through their essential nature, while others struggled to maintain authority despite possessing every official credential. This natural authority cannot be faked or performed, but only earned through the patient work of actual development, through becoming someone whose inner life and outer actions align with sufficient consistency that others trust your judgment and follow your lead. The man who has mastered himself, who sees clearly, who acts courageously in service of rational objectives, who commands powerful presence while executing purposeful action, naturally attracts others who sense that he possesses something valuable they wish to develop in themselves. This is not about domination or control, but about becoming the kind of man others want to follow because they believe you are going somewhere worth going. The final stage of integration involves reaching a point where masculine power operates so naturally that you forget you are exercising it, where effective action becomes as automatic as breathing rather than requiring constant conscious attention. Machiavelli would recognize this as the ultimate achievement, when the prince has so fully internalized correct principles that he responds appropriately to situations without deliberate analysis, when strategy flows from nature rather than from effortful calculation. This does not happen quickly or easily, but only through years of consistent practice, where conscious effort gradually transforms into unconscious competence. Where you have repeated effective patterns so many times, they become your default responses rather than special behaviors you must remember to execute. The man who reaches this level of integration has truly transformed himself, has become a substantially different person than he was when he began this journey, has developed capacities that now define his essential nature rather than representing skills he sometimes employs. This is what it means to truly become a man in the sense Machiavelli would recognize, not merely to know principles intellectually, but to embody them so completely that they constitute who you are rather than what you do. What separates these 22 minutes from the countless hours you have spent consuming motivational content is that everything shared here draws not from modern self-help fantasies, but from observation of how power actually operates in the real world, filtered through the ruthless clarity of a mind that studied princes, conquerors, and leaders across centuries to distill what actually works versus what merely sounds inspiring. Niccolò Machiavelli would have recognized immediately the difference between men who transform and men who merely talk about transformation, between those who apply uncomfortable truths and those who seek comfortable lies that excuse inaction. The question you face now is not whether these principles work. History has validated them across 500 years in every domain where human beings compete for resources, status, or influence. But whether you possess the will to implement them, despite the discomfort such implementation requires. Everything you need to know has been laid before you with clarity that removes ignorance as excuse for continued stagnation. Consider how different your life would be 12 months from today if you actually implemented what you now understand about self-command, strategic perception, calculated courage, rational self-interest, powerful presence, purposeful action, and the integration of these elements into coherent masculine power. Not if you think about implementing them, or plan to implement them, or wish you were the kind of person who implements them, but if you actually begin today with the first small steps that compound over time into substantial transformation. The gap between current reality and desired outcome always seems impossibly wide at the beginning, which is why most men never start. But that gap closes through the simple mechanism of consistent action, repeated until new patterns replace old ones. Machiavelli understood that the prince who waits for perfect conditions never acts, because perfect conditions never arrive, while the prince who acts despite imperfect conditions shapes those conditions toward his favor through the force of purposeful will. The tragedy of modern masculinity is not that men lack information about how to become powerful, capable, and influential in their own lives, but that most men consume endless information without ever converting knowledge into action, remaining perpetually in the planning phase, where transformation feels safe because it remains theoretical rather than actual. You could spend the next 5 years reading books, watching videos, attending seminars, accumulating certifications, and discussing principles with others who are equally stuck. Or you could start today with whatever small step feels possible and allow that momentum to build across the coming months. The difference between these approaches is not subtle, but rather represents the fundamental divide between those who achieve what they set out to accomplish and those who spend their lives explaining why circumstances prevented them from attempting anything significant. Machiavelli would tell you plainly that your circumstances will never be ideal, that obstacles will always exist, that others will always present reasons why your ambitions exceed what is reasonable or possible, and that none of this matters if you have decided to become who you know you should be. The path forward from this moment is remarkably simple, even if not easy. Begin with self-command by identifying one area where you currently lack discipline and implementing structure that makes discipline inevitable. Whether through morning routine that establishes tone for your day or evening routine that ensures rest and recovery. Build strategic perception by spending 15 minutes daily in quiet reflection, examining what actually happened versus what you wished would happen or feared might happen. Cultivate courage by deliberately doing one thing each day that makes you slightly uncomfortable, whether speaking to strangers or taking cold showers or having difficult conversations you have been avoiding. Pursue rational self-interest by auditing where your time and energy actually go and ruthlessly eliminating activities that serve neither pleasure nor purpose. Develop presence by occupying space unapologetically and making eye contact without looking away first. Execute purposeful action by identifying your single highest priority objective and dedicating the first hour of each day to advancing it before allowing interruptions to fragment your attention. These are not revolutionary suggestions, but they are revolutionary when actually implemented consistently over sufficient time for compound effects to manifest. The final truth you need to accept is that becoming a man, in the sense explored throughout this video, will cost you something, will require surrendering comfortable mediocrity in exchange for uncomfortable growth, will demand that you make choices others around you may not understand or support, will occasionally leave you feeling isolated as you pull away from patterns and people that no longer serve the person you are becoming. Machiavelli never promised that power comes easily or that virtue guarantees reward. Only that clear understanding of how reality operates, combined with will to act on that understanding, eventually produces results, while confusion combined with inaction guarantees continued irrelevance. The price you pay for transformation is temporary discomfort, difficult conversations, rejected invitations, rearranged priorities, and periods where old identity has died, but new identity feels foreign. The price you pay for refusing transformation is permanent regret, wondering what might have been possible if you had possessed courage to find out, watching younger men accomplish what you once dreamed of achieving, feeling time slip away while you remain essentially unchanged from who you were years ago. Between these two prices, one must be paid regardless, and only you can decide which price you prefer to bear. If what you have encountered in these 22 minutes resonates with something you have always known, but perhaps never articulated clearly, if you recognize these principles as true, even though applying them feels daunting, if some part of you understands that you are meant for more than you have been settling for, then I would encourage you to mark this moment by leaving a comment below sharing which single principle you commit to implementing first. Not all 7 at once in burst of unsustainable enthusiasm, but one clear commitment that you will actually follow through on starting today. Like this video, if you found value here, so others who need this message might discover it. Share it with a man in your life who you believe is ready to hear these truths, and subscribe to this channel if you want to continue exploring how timeless wisdom applies to modern challenges. The algorithms that govern this platform respond to engagement, and your simple action of interacting with this content determines whether it reaches men who desperately need what we have discussed or disappears into the void of overlooked videos. More importantly, taking these small actions right now of commenting, liking, sharing, subscribing creates micro-commitment that makes larger commitments more likely, begins the process of converting passive consumption into active participation. 22 minutes ago, you were one person. What you do in the next 22 seconds begins determining who you become next. Choose wisely.